to challenge perceptions, we can challenge the public and say, actually, we're just like you, we might just need support in our lives sometimes. So it's really important that we're seen in the media.
I'm going to come to you. Do you think there's a nuance when it comes to representation of physical disability versus learning disability? Do you think there are subtle differences, and if so, what are they, and how can the media best meet the needs of the people they're trying to represent?
Yes, so there are so many nuances that it's very complex to explain. Do you like, hands up who likes Taskmaster? Yeah, so I was very moved recently. One of the last TV shows, there were 2 ads that had a wheelchair user on the same TV show, and I was moved almost to tears. But the challenge is that we're not all wheelchair users. We're neurodivergent, we're invisibly disabled, we're learning disabled, everything. And the nuances need to be conveyed, and they need to be, it's not just wheelchairs and people with funky legs running very fast 100 meters. It's every disability that needs to be seen and explained.
I completely agree. And on that note, Eventbrite are here. They've got their photo booths. And if you're a bit fed up and seeing like stock images of non-disabled people acting disabled to magazines or what have you, because like mine's really right up. Go talk to them. They've got a photo booth. Rock and roll. There we go. Got the plug in. Hope you're happy. What do you think the benefits are of accurate representation of disability in the media? What good does it do for the disabled community, both behind the scenes and to your media consumer?
Yeah, it's a great question. For someone like myself who lives with OCD, and a lot of people misunderstand OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, to just be about cleaning and symmetry, yet millions of people in the UK have it, and there's many people who don't speak up because of the shame and the taboo in society. And obviously we understand OCD to be more so about, as I say, cleaning and symmetry, when there's a lot more to it. It's intrusive thoughts, obsessive, unwanted, repetitive thoughts, which have often led people to suicide. So when you think about shows like Scrubs, obsessive compulsive cleaners on Channel 4, it's a poor representation. And I think a lot of people have looked at obsessive compulsive disorder for years as something to be aspired towards, something as if you kind of want, and that's the wrong representation. The same with ADHD or any other neurodivergency, that people with ADHD are quite often seen as troublesome, or they just get easily distracted, which, yeah, it's true, I do get easily distracted and I have to keep bringing myself back. But through that, I think one of the most important things with media representation is it changes the lives of those who are going to now grow up and be able to get the correct diagnosis and the correct representation.
Thank you. Disability in sport, I've always been fascinated by that representation. How does one balance between acknowledging genuine sporting brilliance and disabled athletes without venturing into that whole kind of sort of like inspirational porn sort of thing? So where is the tipping point? And how can media producers best avoid crossing that line and venturing into sort of like inspirational porn territory?
So for those of you that don't know my career, I was a producer for Channel 4 on the Paralympics, and one thing that I sort of emphasised on when I came into Channel 4 was like getting that balance right between athlete and disability. So for me, the order should always be athlete first and disability second, because if we don't mention the disability, it feels like we're ignoring it. So it has to always be mentioned in some way, but if you mention it first, it's like, oh, you're disabled, but you're also an athlete. So it's like, well, if you focus on that athlete first mentality, that's how the stories, the personalities get out. And, that was was the privilege for me working on that production. Was, you know, we were in a pandemic production as well, so we were very limited on time and space and distance and social distancing rules. But we worked with the athletes to find out what they were comfortable with, speaking to them off camera first and asking them how they want their stories to be told. Because when they get put in front of like a newspaper journalist without a disability most of the time will focus on the disability because that's the most interesting part to the non-disabled person. But when you get disabled people working with disabled athletes, that's when the story and the narrative gets more balanced, and that's how, for me, you do it.
So from what I've been hearing so far from everyone, it sounds like it's a real case of nothing about us without us. If a, Daniel, I'll keep you over the knocking here. So if you think media, production company or a film company or any kind of outlet was to come to you, I want to pick your brains as to what the best call of action would be to tackle the disability story. What's the starting point? What's the best foundation you can give any media outlet to do disability and do it with respect?
Yeah, so I feel that, you know, responsibly telling our stories and creating a more positive narrative quite often is really important. I think the foundational aspect is, if you think about you as individuals, if those companies came to yourselves, you wouldn't be able to give them real lived experience. You'll be able to give them, you know, stories which are quite unique to you, but by compiling some of those, actually get a real understanding of how to build a compelling, powerful, but realistic story of what it's like to be disabled. And, you know, by actually engaging in the community, by supporting disabled content creators, by really starting to think how they can use our combined knowledge to actually, you know, create and challenge some of those societal norms and really actually, you know, bring it to life in a way that is both relates to us and resonates with us, but also builds that awareness and allows the wider world to start to appreciate exactly what it's like and really start to, you know, create stories that actually change the ableist society that we live in today.
And whose responsibility, okay, I'm going to come to you on this, whose responsibility do you think it is to fix this? Because a lot of the time, I personally feel that as a disabled person, I'm always being asked to solve a problem that I didn't create. So should we be working with people? How cooperative should we be? And ultimately, is it just not down to the industry to just grow the hell up and be a bit less ableist?
I've had experience of this, so without naming the show, a few years ago I was approached by quite a well-known Channel 4 show, and they told me that they were going to have a storyline for a character who was going to have a learning disability. So we were like, brilliant, great. So we got them to talk to some people with a learning disability, A, so that they could hear about their lives, B, they could understand and learn about the challenges they face in their lives, and then they said to us, would you like to come up to the studio? Would you like to come and meet the cast who are going to be part of this storyline? Come and meet the production team, train us, educate us. So we all went up there and we spent 3 days with the production team, with the cast, and we gave them some really good education, we gave them some really good training, and we thought, brilliant, we've done it, and they were going to get an actor with a disability in place. So then when it went all a bit quiet, we were like, what's going on? And then it turned out they'd hired an actor without a disability, and all of our time we had spent doing everything to help them went out the window. And I was really cross because I was like, oh, hold on a minute, I spent a lot of time making sure we're going to get this right, and then they didn't go and listen to us, and it was awful. And so it's so important that, you know, film production people, TV production people, radio production people, they actually, the first thing they should think is when they're going to do something, they come and talk to people like me and other people with a learning disability, because obviously I work in learning disability world. So it's really important that people come and talk to us first, because we are the experts of our lives. We know our lives, we know our stories, because then they can get it right. So they can, and co-production is very important to me. Actually, that's something that I'm working on at the moment within Makeup. So it's all about co-production right from the start. Come and talk to us, learn about our lives, and then we can work with you.
And down the end here, when situations like that happen and people get it so very, very wrong, production companies can wash their hands of it and move on to the next series or the next job. The social community can't. So what's the collateral damage when the media do portray us badly?
Yeah, it does feel like 2 steps forward and 1.9 steps back at the moment. If I think about my own condition, MS, Coronation Street had a character, I think it was Coronation Street, sorry, I'm not a soap opera fan, but they had a character with MS, great, but suddenly he started having hallucinations. Now, MS, you can have pretty much any symptom out there, but the damage done by just imagining up a storyline that just happened to suit the character and the thrill of the soap was disastrous and leaves a lasting impact because people, live lives through soap sometimes and love their characters and really experience it, and that was awful. Conversely to that, in lockdown, Sex Education, another great show, cast for a character with MS. And I did the casting virtually, and I was supposed to be Irish and working class. So, funnily enough, I didn't get the part, but I did feedback that he was supposed to have mobility issues. So, conversely to the script I was playing to, they needed to have a bungalow. I don't know if it was my feedback or other MS's feedback, but the person who got it, bugger, not me, he was living in a grungy bungalow, and that was more realistic. So it's just about consulting us. We want allies, we want people, we're in a little void of disabled people talking to disabled people. We need outside people coming in to ask us the questions, but essentially we do need to be consulted and involved and cast and producing.
Yeah, so what I'd just like to add is our experience is incredibly valuable. We should actually pay for that experience. When we're consulting, we are offering years of lived experience, expertise to help them shape a more inclusive product, which will be better for their brand, for their future as a series and a show. We are incredibly valuable, and I think it's really important. Like Ciara said, 3 days of supporting an organisation through a whole process, so much shared learning by you and your team. Not only was it listened to, but maybe if they'd have paid for it, they'd have been more likely to listen to it.
I could not agree more on the financial compensation thing. A while ago, I did a morning Channel 5 show. I'm not going to say the name, but it's hosted by Jeremy Ryan. They were talking to my age, and they're like, "Oh, and what charity does anyone want this fee donated to?" And like, what charities Jeremy give this fee to? Oh, right, he isn't. Fair enough. Just give it to me and cut out the middleman. Like, come on. I'm getting on to, again, bad representation. I'm going to come to you, Shaun, because you mentioned it earlier. When you see things like OCD treatments, what goes through your head? Because whenever I see bad representation of disabled, for example, I'm there, I'm showing my right hand off, and I'm right hand on my left hand. So what goes through your mind, emotionally, and how do you, I guess, process it all? And then do you feel some kind of responsibility to counteract that bad portrayal?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good question. I I think for a long time in my own life, I had an idea that OCD was only about cleaning, and I was guilty of it. I think growing up in a very Caribbean culture, there was the idea that if your house was dirty, if these people come in and clean your house, it's a failure on your culture, and it's a failure on your, everything that you've done in life. So I was guilty of that same misinterpretation of what OCD was. And it was only until for about 5 to 6 years I was living with very obsessive, intrusive, unwanted thoughts. And then I reached a breaking point, was when I finally had the answers that what I had also was OCD. And I looked back at my medical records, and I also found that there was an ADHD diagnosis, which my mum hid from me, so that's also another big complicated issue. But I think within the media, I'm a bit more hopeful about the media in some senses. I think the media is one thing, but I think the business model behind the media is the issue. I think really and truly, if the media is paid and you can buy into advertising, you can clickbait, they've biohacked your psychology. So really and truly, it's also on us as the consumer to choose what we pay into. Because without us, there wouldn't necessarily be a media outlet for us to be able to watch. So that's something else I've also realized on my journey. And just to give an example, when I've gone around and I just have average everyday interactions with people, I met a psychology student and we had a conversation. And we started talking about why she wanted to do psychology. And she told me her story, and then I told her OCD. And she made a comment, which was a throwaway comment. She just said, "Don't look over there because it's not clean." And I had two choices to make, right? The first one is I get really angry, I get really upset at her. But for me personally, I don't think it would have done anything productive for the conversation. I think it would have shut down dialogue, and we wouldn't have come to any sort of resolution. So I took the second approach, which was to have time to conversate with her. Not necessarily to educate, because I think education, it puts me on this kind of intellectual superiority. Like I was at the place where I had a misconception as well. And we had a conversation and she learned to understand. And a lot of her views also came from the media as well. So I think for me, I've had to learn that the media's had a big part to play, but empathy also has a really big part to play. But also the business model behind the media is another issue. Us as the consumers have a big part to play, and the media will therefore change with what we don't consume and also what we do consume.
And now when everything can be a landscape, we increasingly work with our clicks and our eyeballs as we move more towards streaming. And TV becomes gets less outside the verticals that it's been in for so long. So I think one of the reasons that it goes wrong so wrong on screen is the lack of voices behind the camera, as Ciara alluded to earlier. System and kind of being the voice of reason, who actually says, "Oh no, actually that's a myth, that's a misconception. Here's what the experience, here's what the vernacular, or here's what language really is." How do we get more disabled people in positions of influence in the media? I think we're very good at running schemes, and I think the media is very good at putting disabled people in jobs. But I think it's very bad at putting disabled talent in careers. Lee, how do we break that cycle?
I think since forming Tags, I've had a lot of conversations with the big broadcasters in sport, and the problem we encounter is because they have so much capital, and that's what I agree with Shaun on, is that the business model is we just want to throw money at it because that will make it go away, and that's not the answer. The answer is engaging with people, engaging with different experiences, because at Tags we're working on a football project at the minute to get more disabled people into football media. A league approached us to write a guide, and originally they just came to me and say, "Oh, you can consult on every disability," and I was like, "No, I can't, because I'm not deaf, I'm not blind, I'm not neurodivergent." So what we've done there is we've created a consultancy group of people with different lived experience to sort of input into that guide and sort of feedback experiences through us to the broadcasters to make sure that they are thinking about disability in all its forms and not just, tick boxing or throwing a certain amount of money at it and saying like, oh yeah, we've done our job. We want them to be more visible as well. Like you know, when they do like video job applications, they'll go through the certain amount of diversities, and then disability is often at the end or it's missed off because they don't know how to represent it properly. And that's why, you know, when I started tags, it was like, I've had enough now. You need to start speaking to us. So I've created a group where we're not sort of attacking the industry to do better. We're sort of like acting as the middle ground, where, you know, the disabled community come through us that work in sport, and then we feed back to the industry, and then the industry feeds back to us, and we work in like a positive cycle of employment, and that's what we're trying to work on with the broadcasters at the minute.
Yeah, no, I think you made some fantastic points, and I think one thing to really remember is, whilst we all have many similarities, our stories might be very dissimilar in some other aspects as well. And one thing that I think is very important to recognise is, even for me, when people have come to me to consult on obsessive compulsive disorder or ADHD, I tell people my experience is probably very different to a lot of other people. So I think that's really important to remember. And if we can just change the business model, I think things will ultimately change, because money rules the world. If it doesn't have money, it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. And even if you look back in history, there was neurodivergency, there was different disabilities and abilities. So the more and more we have these conversations, I think things will change.
I think it's really important, as you say, that we break out this idea that disabled people are a one-on. And all you really need to do to justify this isn't editorially is hire one disabled consultant and run everything by them. And if that one person greenlights everything, then it's all cool. It's happened very recently on a Channel 4 doc that I'm going to ask about later. So yeah, Ciara, how do we get more disabled people in the industry, but being listened to and not just there to make coffee or tick a box?
I think again the top thing is come and actually talk to people with a learning disability, talk to people with a disability first, do it in a real good co-production way, because actually then they can see people's talent, they can hear people's stories, they can hear people's lives, and actually that's the way to get into the industry, is actually by networking, by doing co-production. Then they might go, oh actually I'm really interested in talking to you, like let's have a meeting. So it's all about networking, finding out where people are, finding out who they are, where they are, what they do, and kind of that's the way I've done it. So whenever I've built up a network with someone, I kind of go, right, actually, I'd like to talk to you about this show, see if we can get some people on it. I'd like to talk to you, so I'd like someone with a learning disability interviewed on that radio show. So actually it's about building up networks and then finding out actually who is best for it, because we as people with a disability, we are all different, we all have our own likes and dislikes, we all have our own support needs, and it's about finding out who the right person is for that opportunity. So we all have different experiences in our lives. Now, I'm not the expert of everything. I'm the expert of some things in my own life, but I don't know everything. I don't have experience of everything that goes on in someone else's life. So it's about actually, is this the right fit for that person? If it is, giving them the support to go and do it. So it's all about actually meeting people first and working with them in a co-production way, and then see whether the support is there for them to then go and have that opportunity. And that's the way to get into the industry. And also, you know, through my podcast now, I'm talking to famous people. I'm getting some really good networks going. So that's another really good way of doing it.
You're interviewing a couple of famous people at the X, aren't you? I hear one of them's really famous. The other one's me, but you're interviewing either Adelaide later today. Yeah, someone got it. And same question down the end here. How do we get more disabled people in positions of power and influence who aren't just there to tick a box? Because to my mind, that's the only way we're going to make systemic change.
So for me, it's like a multifaceted thing. The media has to tap into the educational pathways that exist. They aren't perfect, but there also needs to be representation there for the next generation to see what they can potentially be and really have a vision of the opportunities that are there. There's the aspect around some parts of media are more have learnt more lessons on this journey than other parts, and there's a responsibility there within the media itself to think about how they can share learnings and start to develop the talent pathways. You know, like Shaun says, the media industry is worth trillions of pounds. Invest in some of those pathways, invest in that talent. The talent's there. You go to them sometimes, they're like, oh, we just can't find the diverse talent. It's here, it's right here, in these rooms, in those places. But they've got to make that effort, take that bit of time to really invest in those. And when it comes to the media from a very senior perspective, there's very little diversity and representation at a senior level across the media. That will gradually and hopefully change. But like you said, Adam, we can have all the diversity targets in the world, but if the places aren't inclusive and are really ableist, then we're not going to feel like we want to be there in the first place. We've got to get that. We've got to get it both in front of the camera, but also behind the camera, because the casting process is vital. If there's no diversity in the casting process, how are we going to? They're going to miss things, not necessarily because they're discriminating, but because they're just not self-aware and they've not got that experience either.
Yeah, just a little hint for that. Look, we're all not going to all be film stars or TV producers or whatever, but a little hint for those of you who are keen to forward your careers and become the next Johnny Depp or whatever. There's a couple of hashtags on Twitter especially. Hashtag casting. You have to wade through loads of nonsense, and then finally you'll find something that you can cast for. And likewise in PR, so getting yourselves in the media, it's hashtag journo request. If you've got a spare hour because you're disabled or tired or in bed, then have a look at that and you might find yourself on telly the next day.
Thank you. I hinted I was going to ask about it earlier. It wasn't on the original brief I was sent, because it's happened very quickly and the media moves like that. I don't know how many of you know of Rosie Jones's documentary coming out with the name. I'm going to go all the way around, because I know Ciara's really passionate about this one way or the other. So let's start with you. So Rosie Jones, is she? Like, what the hell?
So I recently got invited by Channel 4 to preview the documentary in full. I had the same reaction as some people in the audience who have just popped at that title, because I'll move away from my career just to give you a personal story. That word's followed me around since high school. I do not like it. But after seeing it and the content and the way Rosie's described why the title has been used, I think it's justified. Some of you may not agree with me, and I totally get that. But once you see the content, it's out in mid-July, I think you'll realise, because it's not, that word is not viewed in the same light as a racist or a homophobic or sexist slur that nobody would dare utter in this room today. And I think that's what the message Rosie is trying to get across, is when people say this, it's often dismissed as banter or just having a laugh, but we want to sort of make society realise that that word has a mark that has an impression on people, and it's had an impression on me for years. And I think until we start viewing it in that same light, it's not going to change. So I think people will disagree with me, and that's fine. But like I say, after watching it, I hope that there will be certain changes of just a mind, because one thing I don't really like in the disabled community is that when somebody of a certain status in the disability community tries to do something, other disabled people start attacking them, and I don't think that does any good, because they've got a platform, they're raising awareness, they're doing something. So just because we've not liked the way they've done it doesn't mean that they're doing anything particularly. They're doing it in their own way. Everyone will view it in their own way. So I just want people to bear that in mind before going on a rant on Twitter or whatever social platform you use, because I at the end of the day, we're all here to celebrate, champion, support and challenge disability views. So that's what I want us to do as a community, instead of being attacking and debating each other, because that's just not helpful in my personal view.
Yeah, you made some great points. I think healthy debate should always be encouraged. And the same thing with the word, when I saw what I saw, obviously she has to also greenlight it herself, so she probably chose it for a reason. And as much as people wouldn't agree with it, the context is everything. It gives people a chance to look into it and then to really come to an actual concrete decision on whether you still don't agree with the content. The title, yes, is outlandish, it's out there, and that's deliberately done for a reason. Once again, it captures people's attention. It has people talking, and that's exactly what the media wants. So, you know, you can see it from two sides. If you look past the title, and you look past certain words, and you get to the content, come to the decision, or the second side is you just decide to boycott it altogether. I think you should have an opportunity to always look at something and come to a fully informed decision. And you're right, that I think that there's a lot of words in society that we use just as commonplace. You know, same with OCD, same with ADHD, same with bipolar and many other neurodivergencies and more. So I think we need healthy discussion. And yeah, my answer would be let people come to their own conclusion. But I can understand the outroar because, as you said, it's a word that's followed you your whole life, and people have used it for me as well. So yeah.
No, I agree. I completely get the uproar around the title. It's a word that still follows me around. There is an argument that it justifies people using the word, but I think the people that were going to use that word were both already using it, or were going to use it anyway. I don't think anyone saw the name of that documentary and went, "Oh, I've learned a new word today. Let's go and do it." I've also seen it, and I know Rosie well, and I like her, and I get her choice. I think that word produces a little reaction, as it should. And maybe now that it's gotten that reaction, it's in the public conscious, it can start to become treated as seriously as like racial, homophobic and transphobic slurs are being. But again, context is key. I get the title. It's the most Channel 4 title ever, isn't it? Most Channel 4 thing ever. But I'm gonna wait, I'm gonna watch it, I'm gonna stay off Twitter, that's for damn sure. Twitter's where good conversation goes to die, coordinated and lonely. And I reckon it's gonna do more good than harm when it's all said and done. But the reaction right now, I totally understand it.
Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit careful here because when I first saw Rosie Jones on the media circuit, I thought, here's someone who will really represent us, someone who's a really positive role model, and I absolutely loved Rosie Jones. I was a huge fan of her. I bought her books, I watched her on TV, I was a huge fan of Rosie. But when I did hear the title of the show, I was very disappointed, and I did air my view on social media. Part of me does want to watch the documentary, part of me doesn't, because for me personally, the R word, when I was growing up as a person with a learning disability, I was called that at school a lot, and it holds a very upsetting. It's very upsetting for me with that word. That holds a lot of bad memories for me, and I was very angry about it. But I can see why it's been used. I can see why that decision's been made to use that title. But 3 people with a disability were part of that documentary, and they disagree with it, and they pulled out. And obviously that's their decision. But it doesn't really show very good inclusion now with people with a disability, because there aren't any more people with a disability in it now. So I don't know, I feel like part of me wants to watch it and make a decision, part of me doesn't because of the way I feel about it, but that's my own opinion.
Yes, gosh, I'm going to reserve judgment until I see that. I will watch it. This is Disability Pride Month, and we need to own the word disabled and be proud to be disabled. and accept that we're disabled and get on with life and move the movement forward. But at school, I can remember calling, I was diagnosed later in life with MS, I can remember calling people spaz. Now I have spasms in ultimate karma. The local school, my rival school, it was called Henry Floyd, so we called it Flids, as in thalidomide, and I just regret that to my dying day, but that's what kids do, and I hope Rosie's documentary will challenge perceptions, maybe upset us a little, but overall it's going to be a positive programme. I can't wait. I'm sorry it's upset some people, but we need contention, though we need to be supportive of each other.
Yeah, very quickly, I mean, for me it caused me to start arguing with myself in my head. So it was like, one side of me is like, this is incredibly re-traumatising for so many people, and it's going to take them back to those places where really we try and not go there because of the amount of emotion that's attached to it. On the other side, as a community, we have, as the world evolves from a language perspective and we understand the origins of things, we all have our own preferences in terms of how we like to be referred to by others and how we refer to ourselves. And I think that there's an element of empowerment in being able to choose the words that you use but have acceptance from the rest of the community. There's a real fine balance, and obviously that term it has significant connotations. Why is it being used? Like everything in the media, it's no different than a clickbait headline, if we're honest. Will that get people to, who wouldn't normally watch it if it was a more toned down title, to watch it and then maybe reconsider the learnings from it? Potentially. So, I mean, it does have the potential to make a difference, but the initial impact of a title hitting, we do need to look beyond the headlines in life so often. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's left them a bit re-traumatised, and that's not what we want in the community.
On that bombshell, I am out of questions. I would like to thank my panel for joining me today. I'd also like to thank the wonderful audience, and I think we have time. Goddamn right we have time. Do the audience have any questions? Oh, you are remarkably quick.
You mentioned about Caribbean parents and disability. And I'm North African, and I know the exact same energy because I'm still dealing with it with my dad at the moment. How would you say in media, how we can utilize media to improve like that scenario where, so that future like black and brown kids don't have to deal with that hatred talk from their own parents, or completely ignoring that their kid has a disability completely?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It takes me back to a time where the more I've read history is the more I've understood. Like once upon a time ago, they used to put hats on kids when they had learning difficulties and call them dunce, right? The world has evolved and changed, and I think especially within an African and a Caribbean context which we can relate to, I think there's a big denial, and I think with denial they believe that ignoring the problem stops it from existing. So when I look back at my medical records, when I looked through my mum's notes, I said, Mum, there was ADHD diagnosis in about 2000. Looked back in further notes and they believed I also had ADHD for a very long time. Now ADHD, for example, is very complex because there's also young black boys that are overdiagnosed with ADHD for any one of their behaviours. So there's a big complexity. I do think with the older generation, because they've had to survive for such a long time in such hostile territory, they don't want anything to change their ideas and their ideals. They're set in the way that they believe in the world. But with my mum being at home, and she's heard me on podcasts, she's heard me have conversations, and I've sent my stuff to her, she came up to me one day and she said, I never knew that's what OCD was. And I said, well, I inherited a lot of the behaviour from you, like the check-in behaviour, going to school, just being a bit zoned out, a bit distracted. And it slowly started to change, but that's on an individual relationship. I think on a grand scheme, I I think it's really hard. And I found from speaking with my mother and having my friends around me and having other people around my mum that permeate her ideas and her ideals, she started to really soften up. And as time's gone on, she started to really understand things a little bit more. I would say it's really important to have a good community around you, but people that can also explain to your parents beyond you, because sometimes our parents won't listen to us because they have such a bias. My mum doesn't listen to me for a lot of things. She won't hear it, but if somebody else tells her, she'll be like, oh yeah. I'm like, but Mum, I've told you the exact same thing. I've told you 100% the same thing. So I would say sending articles from other people, giving her a chance to listen to other podcasts. Another thing I learned with my mum is taking her to a place where she's more likely to take on information. So when we sit down and we watch some of her nonsense shows that I don't like, it eases her into a conversation about things, and she may not receive it the best at times, but she'll go away and really think about it. But that's what I found in my personal experience has worked. So yeah.
Good answer on that. And I think we've got time for one more. You're going to have to wave at me. I'm super excited. Quality. Oh, quality.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I wanted to acknowledge is that we can have a conversation about positive representation, but I think we need to acknowledge the real harm that some of the recent negative representation has done. I'm talking particularly about the ADHD community with the recent Panorama documentary that threw into question thousands, if not tens of thousands, of people's ADHD diagnosis for a reason that wasn't in the public interest as far as I'm concerned. And when I made a complaint about it, I got a form letter back saying, I understand you're very disappointed, but these are the facts. And I was like, no, I'm a human with ADHD talking to you, telling you that yes, perhaps it is easier for a white man to get an ADHD diagnosis just on his say-so. And that perhaps should have been the real focus of the documentary, but I think it's not just representation in fiction, those kind of sport. It's actually, some of the news is actively harming us, and I think I just wanted to acknowledge that, really.
No, completely agree. That Panorama documentary was a fucking shit show. I'm assuming, Shaun, I'll let you come in on this one.
Do you know what I think? ADHD in itself is a very complex matter because it's only been something people have really started to understand. And ADHD can very much be a strength, otherwise you otherwise know it as a novelty-seeking gene. You get bored by things really quickly, and some people would argue that human evolution would have expanded as a result of people with ADHD. They would have gone off and started looking for other things in the world. But the issue then again is with privatization. With privatization, there's no real regulation in anything that people do. And quite often what we see with people with ADHD is if someone believes they can't focus, they go, yes, I must have ADHD. There has to be certain clinical criteria to meet that kind of diagnosis. And it's the same with another Panorama documentary about the antidepressant story. It is a complex situation because when you read a lot more and you start to understand things, I do think we live in a society that makes us a bit more ill than we technically should be. I think we should live in a society that should be more inclusive and we should use our strengths. But especially with the whole ADHD, it proves the issue of privatization. These people are there to make money. They're not there for the betterment necessarily of society. So, yeah.
I can give you a direct answer from a media standpoint if you want. So, we'll always give you the right to complain, but the media will always justify themselves. So, they'll take it on, but they won't actually change because, they'll go through certain checks and processes before something gets made and think we've done everything right, but, we understand people have different feelings on it, which is why, when we were talking about the other documentary Adam mentioned, I understand people don't have the same view I do, and I would never invalidate that. But I think, the Panorama, their whole thing is to get people, animated, shall we say, from a Paralympics point of view. They've also done documentaries on classification, which is a very touchy issue in sport. I also fed back my own personal views on how they did that, because they always picked the pity story, like, oh, this person got reclassified and now they're well overweight, or like, you know, and they just, I couldn't even begin to describe my feelings on the imagery they used in that documentary. So I fed my feelings back, and since it's just like, they've checked the box, they've done the story, and they'll never follow up on it. So it's just about creating topical debate, and that's how the media works. And going back to the title of the other documentary we were talking about, if it was renamed Rosie Jones Investigates Ableism, nobody would have the same reaction, because people still don't know what ableism is. It's not a thing that's discussed. So titles and editorial policy are always dictated to get that kind of reaction. So when you get a sort of push-off response from them, it's just how they work.
And do we have time for one more? Yeah, let's cover one more. Talk again. Oh, okay. What do I stretch? What do I stretch? Where am I coming? Where am I coming? Keep waving.
Oh.
Nice.
Sorry, it's very far away. I suppose my question is, we're talking about Rosie Jones and her documentary, and I, as a disabled person, a lot of the community and a lot of the sort of fellowship I've discovered in disability activism has been online and specifically on Twitter. But conversely, I have very mixed feelings about Twitter, because the way that it engenders discussion and discourse is, in my opinion, very unhealthy and very not like the way people have been normally discuss things. And especially, just as a latest example of that is the Rosie Jones debate, because people are not discussing that in a, well, not all people, but just because that's the nature of the way Twitter works. It pushes the most, you know, over-the-top way of putting something, or the most extremist way of putting something, to the front of people's screens. So I suppose, on the other hand, because of the fact that, among many other reasons, disabled people often spend a lot of time at home or are not as mobile as other people, Twitter and online avenues are the main sort of forum for activism. So I suppose with that in mind, what do the panel think about a new space that we can find that's, you know, conductive and conducive for this sort of debate and discussion and community?
No, thank you. I think Twitter has always been quite a toxic platform, and since that utter maniac took over, it's only gotten worse. I think Twitter is where good conversation goes to die cold, naked, and lonely. And the fact you've only got 240 characters to have quite deep and meaningful discussions means that we somehow condition ourselves to only read and write and discuss things in like headlines or subreddits, so we don't do long conversation well anymore. But I don't think a new platform would necessarily be the way to go. I think we need to reclaim or take back the existing platforms to what they were made for. Like when Twitter first came out, it was a place where we could all go, I'm a deeply messed up human. Who else is a messed up human? And then someone would write me like, yeah, I'm also a deeply messed up human. I like my dog more than my girlfriend at least 2 days a week. Let's be friends. So I think kind of reclaiming those spaces, for me, is the real trick, rather than thinking of new ones or trying to like re-engineer the wheel. What do we all think? We'll go this way.
So I think we've got to appreciate the accessibility of that platform. If we look at the wider media, we can't influence Panorama. They'll say, we're bringing difficult discussions to the fore. But what they're doing is polarising conversations to draw attention. It's the same with the algorithms that we work with on social media, but we can start to be the masters of creating those spaces where we can have productive discussions, where we can all learn from each other. and we just get to harness those spaces more. And I suppose appreciate that so much of the way that the economy works, like Shaun said earlier, is focused on drawing people's attention. The more they can hook people's attention, the more activity, the more time they spend on there, the more data they get on you, the more money they make. So it's knowing how it works so we can start to become masters of the very spaces that we use, and we all have a role to play in that. But yeah, sometimes we're up against quite toxic spaces, and we need to be mindful of that as well, and our own well-being and self-care too.
Yeah, Twitter. Look, it can be great. You can reach out, you can meet amazing people. You can block out and mute and whatever, but it's never going to be perfect. Lee and myself and Ciara as well, we talk a lot on LinkedIn. That's a fairly positive, supportive environment. Overnight, Facebook or Meta has launched Threads. Who knows? But I think I agree with Lee. It's more about claiming the existing spaces, being positive, accepting the abuse or dealing with the abuse, and muting and blocking it as wherever is appropriate on the different channels.
Yeah, I think you've all made really good points. I think, for me, I remember when I first went on Twitter and I was told, put on your bio, all views are my own. It means my views come from my mouth, not anybody else's. And I've always had that on mine. But I know, because I'm more now in a leadership role where I work at MenCap, but also I'm a podcaster, I'm getting more high profile now, and I know that I'm going to get it. And it's just a case of actually, I know this week I've been involved in so many conversations around the certain documentary that I'm not going to bang on about because I don't want to. But I think it's just about being kind to each other. It's about actually, I'll respect your view, you respect mine, and let's agree that. And kind of now I've kind of gone, do you know what? I'm sick of talking about it. I'm moving on now. I've got so much better other things to talk about than the certain person. But yeah, I think it's just about, we've just all got to be a bit kind. But if anybody wants to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Ciara LEO1.
Got it in? Happy now? Good stuff. Cool. I was tweeting that I thought BTS were overrated. That was 4 weeks of my life being told I was wrong.
Recently, actually, I deleted all my social media apps, and it's the best decision I ever made in my entire life. The accounts are still there, but I only have Facebook Business Suite to reply to messages. And living in the real world is a very different place, because you catch yourself trying to get a dopamine hit on the casino that is social media. And people forget that the way the feeds are created, to scroll it and scroll it, it's you're going to a casino slot trying to win a prize to get something that hits your dopamine. So again, this is biohacking, this is psychology at its finest. And the first thing I realized when I woke up one day was, before I brush my teeth, before I do anything, the first thing I do is check my phone. And not doing that has been revolutionary. And it sounds like I'm enlightened, but I would say I'm enlightened to some sort of degree. I'll go back onto social media at some point. I believe that this conversation is a classic example of why you can't limit a conversation to 140 or 240 characters. It is through conversation where you learn. It's through bringing up difficult conversations and topical debates where you actually find some sort of middle ground. We don't have to agree on everything. And I know a lot of people, they don't believe things like cancel culture exists, but I strongly do believe they exist. Even in my community, to have certain conversations are very hard to have. So if there's any advice I give to people, as much as social media can be a space for activism and advocacy, there's a whole big world out there, and not everybody's got to be out there putting their stuff. I've learned you can be an advocate in your own personal interactions with people, and that's something very important. You don't have to have a big platform behind you to be able to do that, and this is the illusion that I think social media has created, and I have been guilty of that. I've definitely been guilty, but I would say go on a social media detox and go and learn to be around people you don't like and you disagree with, and you might be able to find that you have more in common than you have that's not in common.
Can we all just agree Twitter's a cesspit? My coping strategy is different because I envy you, my man. I can't delete it totally because I've got content, I've got contacts that I use for media work, so I've never been able to delete it until I retire from the industry, unfortunately. But the way I cope with it is I use the protect your tweets or protect your followers sort of thing. So I've not got loads of random accounts following me, loads of businesses DMing me saying, can we take a picture of your feet or something like that. It's like, you know, I'm just tired of weird platforms, and so I want to be followed by people that actually know me, that know my story, that, you know, basically understand what I'm about, rather than just if I posted something about the documentary, my own personal views, I don't want to get dragged into a conversation with Dave from Bournemouth who like sits on the couch all day and wants to complain about something just for the sake of complaining. I'm not like that. You know, I just keep my tweets simple, and that's how I cope with it really, because social detox is nice. I've done it a few times, but like I say, there comes a certain point in the media where you need to use it.
And that is our time. We've overrun. I can feel the finance panel's eyes boring into me like a sonic screwdriver. That's a reference to the Hoovians. So again, thank you all for coming. If we didn't get to your question, we're going to be hanging about afterwards. Come grab us, come chat to us, come take selfies and follow us on Twitter and tweet these things at us. And yeah, thanks for coming. Enjoy the expo and peace out.